But what else is happening, folks? A lot is going on in the world. Now, I know there's this video floating around the internet of Dianne Feinstein, the mainstream Democrat, who's just kind of part of the Democratic Party machine of San Francisco, being confronted by all these school kids, children, youths who want the Green New Deal. And they approach her. And what does she say? She says, "Wow, kids, I'm sorry I don't agree with you, but I'm so glad you're involved in the political process. I'm glad you came to my office. You just inspire me. You're the next generation. You're the hope for the future. I'm so glad to see you." Is that what she said? No, not what she said. Wasn't too thrilled to talk to these young people. Now, at this point, a lot of people are outraged by how she talked to them. I am certainly no fan of Dianne Feinstein's, I'll tell you that much. And I think it's interesting. It needs to be said that Dianne Feinstein, she represents an interesting history within the Democratic Party, right? If people look at the history of the Democratic Party in California, she really emerged as the Democratic Party of California was kind of reforming itself, and you could say it was almost the beginning of what Clinton really finished up with the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, where there was almost, you could say, a purge in the Democratic Party of more left wing elements, and the circumstances in which Dianne Feinstein became the mayor of San Francisco are very, very shady. So the mayor before Dianne Feinstein, the mayor who was in office prior to Dianne Feinstein, was a man named George Moscone. And George Moscone was very much a kind of a Bernie Sanders Democrat. He was the mayor of San Francisco. He started out, I mean, this was the 70s. This was the hippie time where there was a lot of activism and an anti-war movement. And I don't think Moscone called himself a socialist, but he was definitely a left-wing fellow, and he was talking about guaranteed health care, and he was he was in with the labor unions, and he was a far left guy. George Moscone was the mayor of San Francisco. And George Moscone had actually been, run against in the election. Dianne Feinstein had run against him from the right, saying that he was too far left. George Moscone had gotten elected mayor of San Francisco, and he had been aligned with another individual who was big in San Francisco's politics on the Board of Aldermen. That's what they call like the city council out there. They call it the Board of Aldermen. And another individual, that being Harvey Milk, the first openly gay elected official who was on the Board of Aldermen, was aligned with George Moscone. And they were in the government there in San Francisco, very liberal, very social democratic almost. Dianne Feinstein did not approve of them. They were too far left. They were too left-wing, too radical. But George Moscone and Harvey Milk, George Moscone, the liberal mayor of San Francisco, Harvey Milk, the first openly gay elected official on the Board of Aldermen, they were aligned with a very, very interesting individual by the name of Reverend Jim Jones, right? The Kool-Aid Man, right? The strange apocalyptic cults of, the guy said he was the reincarnation of both Jesus and Lenin, and it was the People's Temple, and they were this big, strange kind of Christian socialist messianic weirdo cult that had a lot of power in San Francisco. And both Harvey Milk and George Moscone had entered a political alliance with Reverend Jim Jones, who, was a wacky cult, but he was calling himself a socialist, right? And so, you had kind of a far left-wing government in San Francisco. And Harvey Milk and George Moscone, from what I understand, ended up appointing Reverend Jim Jones to the board, to the housing board in San Francisco. And it was kind of, you could say like a far left alliance where the labor unions, and the gay movement and the People's Temple, Reverend Jim Jones, kind of had power there. And they were kind of, social democrats, right? But they were pretty far left. And so scandals about Reverend Jim Jones began to surface about some of the stuff he'd been doing and some of the sexual stuff that was going on in his cult. So Reverend Jim Jones and his followers fled San Francisco, and they moved to Guyana in South America, which at that point had a pro-Soviet government, kind of a Marxist government there in Guyana. They were out in the middle of the jungle. They had Jonestown, and they were all there. It was the Jonestown Agricultural Project. So they fled San Francisco. That was a key ally of Mayor George Moscone, and Harvey Milk got out of there when some of the sexual scandals and other things that were going on inside the People's Temple cult became revealed. So Reverend Jim Jones, out of the picture, he's in Guyana, right? and then we know what happened. Some senators, congressmen went down to Jonestown. Then they tried to leave. They were killed. And then all the Jonestown people, after the congressmen were killed, they all committed mass suicide, right? A big incident. People drank cyanide, killed themselves. This cult that had been key in getting Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone elected, they all committed suicide, right? The mass suicide, Jonestown, horrendous incident. Then shortly after that, a former member of the Board of Aldermen and a former police officer named Dan White, if I'm correct, who was a former police officer, didn't like Harvey Milk, was a Democrat, didn't like Harvey Milk, didn't like George Moscone, walked into City Hall with a gun and shot George Moscone, the mayor, and he also shot the first gay elected official, Harvey Milk. So you had the mayor of San Francisco shot, you had the first gay elected official shot, and in the aftermath of that, then you had Dianne Feinstein she was next in line, sworn in to be the mayor of San Francisco. In the aftermath, a couple weeks after the Jonestown suicide, you got two prominent elected officials who were aligned with Reverend Jim Jones. They get assassinated. And then Dianne Feinstein becomes mayor of San Francisco. And very famously, very, very famously, the individual Dan White who shot George Moscone and he shot Harvey Milk, he got a very short sentence, like 2-3 years in prison, with the infamous Twinkie defense. The Twinkie defense, right? That he, was crazy and he was eating a lot of junk food. And they call it the Twinkie defense. And so this former police officer, member of the Board of Aldermen, didn't agree, Democrat, but did not agree with Moscone, did not agree with Harvey Milk, shoots the mayor, shoots a member of the Board of Aldermen, and then Dianne Feinstein walks into power and becomes the mayor of San Francisco. Do you want to talk about a shady, shady, shady background? That's how Dianne Feinstein became a prominent politician, right? She'd just been a member of the Board of Aldermen prior to that. But Dianne Feinstein's role as mayor of San Francisco, and now she's in the U.S. Senate, began with the mass suicide in Jonestown, the assassination of Harvey Milk and George Moscone, who she'd run against, and then in the aftermath of that, you had the individual who killed them, Dan White, getting a tiny sentence for killing the mayor of a city, and the Twinkie defense, and then you have a huge amount of rioting by the gay community, the White Night riots they called it, where they all went out and rioted in response to the short sentence given to the guy who shot Harvey Milk. It's all very, very shady. I'm not that old. I wasn't in San Francisco during the 1970s, obviously. It sounds like a pretty scary place. A lot of confusion going on there. It was a very, very, very strange thing. And Kinky throws in that Dan White then killed himself shortly afterwards. Really, really strange, right? We're talking 1978, San Francisco politics, a kind of, what almost somebody looking at this might even say it was like a mini coup d'etat, where, like the far left government, this alliance between Reverend Jim Jones and certain trade unions and George Moscone and the gay rights activists, they were running San Francisco. And then, the cult kills themselves in a mass suicide, and then a former police officer shoots them, and then you have Dianne Feinstein running the San Francisco Democratic Party. That's very, very, very shady. Dianne Feinstein's history, I hope that at some point more information comes out. I hope that there's more revelations about what exactly was going on there. That is really shady, right? The Jonestown incident is really bizarre. When I was in school, they would always talk to us about Jonestown, and you almost got the impression they would say, oh, it's a cult, but the whole communist angle, they never really played it up. And I always thought that was weird, because you would think that if you wanted to attack communism, you'd just say, look, this crazy Reverend Jim Jones, killer, he was a communist. See how evil communism is. Well, he wasn't really a communist. I guess he claimed he was kind of a communist. He also claimed he was a Christian, and he was the reincarnation of Jesus, and it was a strange moment. That whole thing was really, really strange. That moment in 1978 when Dianne Feinstein emerged in the middle of political chaos, with the mayor being assassinated, with the first gay elected official being assassinated, with the Jonestown massacre of this crazy cult that had been key. The whole thing was really strange. So Dianne Feinstein is a very, very shady figure, right? And That's all I got to say about that. Dianne Feinstein, she should give you the willies, as they say. She should make you nervous because, she emerged in the middle of a strange, strange political cauldron of events that is very, very shady, with a lot of people dying and a lot of confusion and a lot of rioting and a lot of shady activities. That's all I got to say about that. Dianne Feinstein's emergence to power was pretty strange. So the fact that she wasn't nice to a group of kids, does that surprise me? Not particularly. She's always rubbed me the wrong way. Now, people talk about her husband being a Wall Street guy, being a billionaire, and his financial connections. From what I understand, her husband is also very much a supporter of the Tibetan separatist movement. He's put a lot of money into promoting, trying to break Tibet away from the rest of China. And that's worth looking into as well. But Dianne Feinstein is an interesting character. She wasn't very nice to the kids who supported the Green New Deal, to say the least, right? She wasn't exactly upfront and friendly and thanking them for working hard to be so nice, even though she didn't agree with them. So there you go. That is some shady history there, and no one ever talks about it. Uh, now Kinky is throwing out, how did she get reelected in 2017? Yeah, from what I understand, the California Democratic Party didn't endorse her, right? And that there's a long history. I mean, Dianne Feinstein really, just like Hillary Clinton, she really reeks of that corrupt political machine.